Hello, everyone. This is Yahya, and on behalf of Alkira and 451 Research, which is now part of S&P Global Market Intelligence, I would like to welcome you and say thank you for attending today's webinar titled Addressing the Demands of Network Visibility in Hybrid Cloud Environments. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. To ask a question, simply type it in the question box on your screen. The presentation slides are available for download in the resource section in the console. And on-demand version of the webinar will be available once the live event concludes. With that, I give it to Mike to kick off today's event.
Thanks, Yahya. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. First off, we have Jamie Fox, Director of Technology for Tekion. Jamie, can you give yourself a little introduction, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Fox. I'm the Director of Technology at Tekion, just like Mike said. I've been in the industry about 12 years. Spent seven and a half years at Tesla, and then led IT infrastructure at Casper, which is a direct-to-consumer technology company. At Tekion, I run our physical infrastructure and deployment teams. So that includes everything from customer deployments to our core network backbone and all of our engineering efforts that connect our cloud systems to our on-premise customer environments.
Great, thanks, Jamie. And we also have Ahmed Datoo, Chief Marketing Officer for Alkira. Ahmed, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Great to be on today's webinar. As Mike said, I'm the CMO at Alkira, but have a lot of product and engineering experience in prior lives. And really excited to talk about some of the challenges with the cloud and networking in particular.
Great, thanks, guys. So, just very quickly, our agenda. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that enterprises are facing in networking, and Jamie's going to talk about his experiences, and Ahmed is going to talk about some of the things that he sees, with his customers and industry-wide. We're going to talk about the impact of DevOps and sort of how that is impacting networking and overall, and then we'll talk about some of the business drivers for cloud networking and some of the new responsibilities that network teams are facing. So first, just a little background. This slide is from 451 Research's Voice of the Enterprise survey. And what it shows is there is a continual progression of applications from on-premises, legacy or cloud and non-cloud environments to cloud services. And we've been doing this survey for a number of years, and the cloud growth tends to continue to increase. What's interesting about this that I find about this particular data set is not so much. I wouldn't make the claim that this shows a progression to 100% cloud services. What it says to me is that enterprises are going to have and continue to have a mix of application environments that they need to operate for the foreseeable future, and they're going to need to interconnect them and interconnect them in ways that are intelligent and scalable and versatile and flexible in order to meet the demands of the application developers, business owners, business units, and other stakeholders within the enterprise. So if nothing changes in how IT operates, then having this very diverse set of environments is going to start to have a negative impact on IT operations. One of the sort of continuing themes that we hear is with this growing set of consoles and management structures and management interfaces, IT operators now have to go and touch a larger set of things in order to enact a change, and it becomes very difficult. And luckily, things are changing to simplify IT and simplify the architecture. So to get us started, Jamie, I'd like to get your take on this, but also maybe use this as an opportunity for you to talk about and sort of set the stage for Tekion and what you're doing, and then we can use that as we continue through the rest of the webcast.
Sure. So to set the stage for what Tekion is, Tekion is a cloud software company. Right now, we're focused on the automotive segment. We provide dealership management software services, CRM, and everything kind of few and far in between in the automotive software space. Where it gets really interesting for us is, of course, we're a SaaS app. We're cloud native. We're hosted on major cloud platforms. But if you imagine what happens in a dealership environment, we need on-premise connectivity for interacting with physical devices that are on site. It could be anything from an IoT appliance to as simple as a line printer to print a contract. So just to set the stage, right, we are a cloud native company that needs hybrid cloud on-premise connectivity into our customer locations as well as our wholly owned offices and other facilities.
Great, thanks. And just, I guess, to sort of follow up, do you guys have equipment on premises, or are you using what the customer has on premises, and how does that work?
Yeah, so we're pretty hardware agnostic, and we were designed that way just from a flexibility perspective. Our industry is not flexible at all as far as requirements on network services and even down to specific computers and other appliances. But we designed our entire platform to be hyper flexible and work with 99% of things on the market. So while we do have equipment in some facilities where our customers are, just based on what they have, a lot of times we don't. And we need a solution that helps us basically be completely agnostic to the hardware that our customers have, but give them that same experience from a connectivity standpoint and software experience standpoint.
Okay. In trying to get to that sort of agnostic infrastructure, what kinds of challenges were you facing, both within Tekion, but also within your customer environments?
Sure. So the biggest challenge that we face is actually external, right? It's our customers, and it's not a problem for a single customer, but when you think about how you design a super flexible, scalable system, the best way to do that, and in a past life, I was able to, let's say, rip a building down to the studs and build it exactly how I wanted with exactly the equipment that we were able to put in. We put in the exact same thing all over the world, but here we're really challenged with designing solutions that work in no matter the environment you put them in. And so the biggest challenge, honestly, Mike, is coming up with a solution that works with everything in a very general sense. And that challenge really reared its head when we were looking at how do we get this new requirement of connectivity into a dealership. How do we make it as flexible as possible, but also make it as reliable and visible to us as possible at the same time?
Okay. And then just sort of a similar question, but what kinds of challenges did you face with, say, cloud interconnectivity, either between regions, or if you had that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we're a global company, so we definitely have challenges with interconnectivity in different regions. The biggest thing, honestly, is that we are focused on our company growth and really building our foundation, but we also don't shy away from things being easier for us, right? So instead of us fully designing our own inter-region connectivity and transit gateway connectivity across a global backbone, not only on, let's say, AWS, but also on other cloud provider platforms, we needed something that was functional and does the job as best as it possibly can, but also make it super easy for us to support it and deploy it without having to dedicate teams to it.
Okay, great, thanks. And Ahmed, just I'm curious your take on this graphic and how you see enterprises adopting the cloud.
Yeah, well, I think Jamie's use case is super interesting and super challenging, because typically when you think about building a network, you think about being able to control all of the things that are connecting to the network. I mean, Jamie's use case is it's almost like a partner network or a customer network. That's a combination of infrastructure as a service here on this graph because they're hosted in the cloud, but at the same time, it's a SaaS application because they're hosted in the cloud, but it's also this infrastructure as a service because they need to create this customer network. I think typically what we're seeing across the customer base is probably the first set of challenges is that workloads are being spun up in the cloud. And I think in the Tekion instance, when they started, there was a concerted effort, a decision made by management that they were going to start with being cloud first, right? And so this is a question around, is that normal? Is it a top-down decision? Is it a bottom-up decision? Typically what we see is it's kind of a combination of both, but more often than not, even if it's a top-down decision, there's already groups within the business that have already spun up their own workloads in the cloud. And it could have been to test a particular workload. It could have been because they weren't able to get the DevOps resources or hardware on-prem. There's supply chain related issues that are going on down. There's a whole variety of reasons why people start in the cloud. And so what ends up happening is that it either gets discovered and grows on itself because of the speed. So, and that forces the conversation within the company to say, should we approach any net new application to be cloud first? And then there's the whole entire question around, should we migrate our existing assets to the cloud? And that's typically where you get the top-down decision. So it is generally a combination of both that's driving the move to the cloud.
Yeah, and I actually think, and I agree with you. I mean, our company at its core, it was a top-down decision to be cloud first. We needed, and so the decision or need to find a solution for this hybrid cloud connectivity came after the fact, right? It could be everything from regulations in specific regions or, just cultural functionality or ability that drove a lot of this requirement, but it was definitely not top of mind when the decision was first made to be cloud first.
Sure.
And one of the impacts of this migration to cloud, at least that I'm seeing from the data that we're collecting in our Voice of the Enterprise surveys and in talking to enterprises, is the more they adopt cloud services, and the more cloud services that sort of naturally or organically grow within the organization, the greater the demand for getting a handle on the network, particular connectivity, the thing that we're talking about today, just because it's growing and it becomes very complex. And while it's easy to say set up a network, when something goes wrong, performance is impacted, or these teams need help, they don't necessarily have the expertise within their teams to discover the problem and come up with a solution and so forth. And so the networking teams end up sort of taking on these different environments, or being pulled into helping to run them just sort of naturally. So it's an interesting sort of way of growing demand. So talking about demand, we again, in one of our surveys, we asked about where enterprise IT or where DevOps teams, who are really the consumers of networking, what they're looking for to support their cloud native applications. And I highlighted a couple of elements that I thought were interesting, things like reliable and fast networking, a network that's responsive to change, right? So in other words, shortening that time that it takes to implement a change, bring up a new network, make a change to a firewall, load balancer, or what have you, from what could be maybe weeks or days, and bring it down to hours or minutes. And there's a little bit of demand from the population for support for agile and automatic connectivity between multi-cloud systems, but I think that demand is going to grow. And so, Jamie, I wanted to ask you, is there anything on this list that you saw that was particularly important, or was there something else when you started out on this journey?
No, I think I had the foresight, I think, to really think about the multi-cloud journey that we are looking into and very, very likely moving towards. And I needed, obviously, reliable and fast networking. We needed automatic and agile connectivity, the ones that you highlighted. But, I think an important one is that we needed something that was the second and third ones, right? Products and services that are suited for our application environments, and networking that's responsive to change when applications change. I can tell you right now that if I got a call and said, we are moving everything to GCP next week, there's not a whole lot I would need to do on my network backbone, other than repoint some routes in order to continue to serve customers and have business continuity without them even knowing. I think there's a lot of value in, like you said, something that takes weeks, turning it into hours. I think in a previous conversation, I think I said something like weeks to minutes or something like that. And that's my impression of something like the Alkira platform, where, you have your cloud environments on one side of the equation and your on-premise connectivity on the other side of the equation. And whether they don't know what they're connecting to, and you're free to be flexible and move your workloads wherever you'd like as part of that configuration and deployment.
Jamie, I'm sort of curious. I see visibility and monitoring, being a top area, and I'm sort of curious about visibility and monitoring for you, given that you don't control the network, right? And I think it's your story about how you got your dealerships to connect into your service was also a very interesting one in terms of lessons learned in that journey. Would love if you can sort of share that journey and some of the visibility challenges you had.
Sure. I mean, for us, we needed, we are really agile in our teams, right? Like my whole team structure is very unique in the sense that I don't have a super large dedicated core network engineering team. Almost all of our employees that work either in the field or in our offices are network trained and network able. And so I really wanted to come up with a solution that gave us the most flexibility, not only from a deployment perspective, but like you're saying, Ahmed, the visibility. And for us, having visibility into where stuff is going, routes, traffic flows in a visible manner, rather than pulling them from logs or digging through exports or digging through firewalls, to be honest, is much more scalable for us as we grow globally. We have the misfortune of not having full end-to-end visibility in every single one of our customers. Now, some we do, where we're providing that managed network service all the way to from the edge down to all the dealership on-premise core networking and wireless and everything. But in most cases, we don't have the visibility. And so we need, in a troubleshooting situation, we need as much visibility right in front of us, immediately digestible and consumable, in order to bring our customers back up. Because when we talk about downtime, we're talking about thousands of dollars an hour in a dealership or vehicle environment. And so for us, having a platform that gave us visible troubleshooting and all of the information right in front of us in an automated way, we don't have to reconfigure it ourselves every time we bring up a new endpoint. It is just ready to go as part of the included product, is a huge deal for us from a scalability standpoint.
So Jamie, I remember very early on in this journey that when, as a managed service, you're actually shipping out hardware to your dealers, and you would invariably, have the dealers call in and say, look, I'm not able to reach your application. And there were some clever hacks that you did in terms of, routing the customers, your dealers' traffic through you so that you had that visibility. I would love for you to sort of walk through that journey.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, obviously our application is cloud native, but we have that on-premise connectivity. So when that connectivity is not working, or we're not able to actually serve those workloads, the dealership or our customers can suffer because they may not be able to sell a car or contract a deal. And originally, we went through this journey where we had on-premise hardware, like you were saying, that invariably is not scalable. We can't support 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 things as simple as print servers as we scale our environment. It's not smart, and it just requires a lot of personnel to support. So we said, okay, first step is we're going to centralize that in the cloud so we can manage it ourselves and be flexible. But then we have the connectivity element, right? And so we went through these iterations of what is the best way for us to connect into all of these dealers. And we went through direct cloud connectivity. We went through on-premise hardware that we manage that becomes another network VPN backbone. Ultimately, we've settled on a very flexible, very hybrid model that incorporates a lot of different solutions. But ultimately, our best visibility is from the Alkira platform, in my opinion.
Okay.
Great, thanks. So moving on to sort of a little deeper into DevOps and that sort of interaction with operations. Again, this slide is from the DevOps practitioner's perspective, and it shows that there's been some pretty good progress made on automation and integration of networking within cloud services and automating workflows and so forth. There's also some interesting disparity between what IT engineering sees and what senior management sees as far as the success of these integrations, and that might be partly due to just the effectiveness of IT, making things look easier than they necessarily are. But Jamie, I wanted to sort of get your take. How did you can you talk a little bit about how you worked with your developers, your DevOps teams, or the broader IT estate and business owners when you were setting up the network and sort of setting your requirements and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the nice thing that we ended up doing is we provided ultimate flexibility for our organization, which we're not a core engineering group, like a software engineering group, right? So we don't have this super intricate relationship with DevOps, but we manage all hybrid cloud networking outside of like the production intra-cloud network architecture. So for us, really, the relationship with us and DevOps was about being super close and cohesive from a collaboration standpoint, but also giving us ultimate freedom to control our route tables, control everything that we're doing on the actual network and hybrid cloud architecture, but also delivering their workloads effectively, no matter what we were doing. But ultimately, we wanted to be as agile as possible, and they were supportive of it because they do get the same visibility and understanding. Even if that's not their core competency, they're still able to fully understand what we're doing. And that gave us a lot of freedom to design everything how we wanted to without having to go through DevOps for all of it. So I don't know, Mike, if that fully answered your question, but essentially it's given us super flexibility to internalize in our team a lot of the work that I think in other teams probably has a lot of DevOps integration and help. It's made it very flexible for us to move as fast as we want.
No, that did. And I think there was another aspect to this when we were talking earlier. There's also been some flexibility for your implementation engineers who are, who, as you described, they're not necessarily they're network engineers, but they're IT experts and so forth, and and they can go out now to a customer site and they can do a lot of the connectivity work. So can you talk a little bit about the benefit there and
Sure.
and how it's helped your network engineers sort of focus on more interesting problems, I guess?
Yeah. So the big thing there is that my implementation engineering teams that are incredible, they aren't hardcore network engineers, and they, with the power that we have now with our relationship with DevOps and what we've done, are able to own their projects from start to finish with very minimal interaction from other teams in the technology organization. And of course, we have other teams that are in charge of networking and all of these items. But the goal always, and this really comes from a lot of what I was doing earlier on in my career, is I want every person in the organization that's running a deployment project to be able to own every part of the deployment as much as they can. Now, of course, the network engineering team is setting standards. allocating IP space, things like that. But I wanted everyone on the team to be able to do network deployment work, even if they don't have that full hardcore network background that you would expect from a network engineer. And that's really opened us up to be super, super fast because we don't need to wait on other teams when we're doing our on-site work.
Yeah, and I know in talking to other folks in enterprise IT, one of their goals, which tends to be more sort of support oriented, is they want to be able to enable their support teams to be able to evaluate a problem very quickly and perhaps take some kind of corrective action, usually within a very sort of controlled and bounded sphere, and in order to do that, they can't expect all of their first line support to be experts in all the technologies they use. So they're looking for products and services that would enable them to say make changes in a very deliberate way without having to be an expert. And so, I mean, what kind of benefits is that sort of have you guys found that comes from having that sort of ease of use?
I mean, internally, from a resource standpoint, right? We don't, in a customer support issue escalation standpoint, a lot of it happens at the tier 1, tier 2 level instead of going up to tier 3 or to our network engineering teams. A lot of it happens and never even reaches them, which is a huge win for us because, like you said, and like I told you in previous conversation, that lets our teams focus on architecture and growth and scale and efficiency work instead of troubleshooting current customer problems. But it also returns quicker resolution for customers because we're able to diagnose issues and get them to the right people faster with that visibility that is digestible by just about anyone on the in the support organization.
And I imagine with customers, it starts to engender or inspire, I guess, confidence.
Yes.
In Tekion, and I think for the general enterprise, having the same kind of ability for sort of this quick resolution would inspire similar confidence with their stakeholders, whether they're in the business or with their own customers or partners or whoever.
Yeah, I would hope that's what every enterprise technology or IT support organization, whatever it is, that's what I would think would want, right? Is that confidence that there are inevitably going to be problems and they're going to be solved as quickly as possible, and that the teams have the tools they need to solve them as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
What I think is super interesting about the shift to DevOps is, if you think about how servers and storage used to be provisioned in the past, it would be literally talking to a systems administrator, opening up a ticket, going through the procurement process, then setting it up, racking and stacking, all that sorts of stuff. And on the compute and storage side, because of the public cloud providers, it's literally log on to a console, select a couple of items, put your credit card in, and boom, you're up and going, right? Like what Jamie just talked about on the networking side is so transformational. Like in the past, it requires so much expertise to be able to spin up networking infrastructure. So the notion that you could have implementation engineers, forget about like network engineers or level 2 or level 3, but implementation engineers who are on the front lines, field engineers who have no, deep understanding of networking, but are just sharp individuals, be able to come in and provision their own networking. I mean, it is a game changer, I believe. And I say this just as it relates to this infrastructure as a service concept. Across all aspects of the IT stack, it is very, very disruptive. So
yeah, I agree. I think and I think it's cultural too. I mean, I don't want to say that. I think that you have to have inside the technology organization or IT organization, you have to want to have that flexibility across teams. Some organizations are much more structured and rigid, but we were put into this meeting that solution from day one, which has made it really easy for us to transition to that model. But I don't think it's out of the question for anyone. It just is it's a cultural mindset thing as well, not just an ability thing.
Well, I almost wonder for that cultural mindset, how much of this is a result of changing expectations? Because they look at the compute and storage side and they see it as like almost instantly on. And then that expectation starts to be placed on the networking infrastructure. Like, why is it that I have to wait on the networking side? And it sort of forces this, the ability to adapt, to be able to make sure that the networking is operating just as fast as the other silos.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely from that, right? Everything needs to match. You should not have. I mean, you never want to be the caboose of a initiative, right, in an organization. And so, I think, like you said, right, I think physical networking and physical access has always been a restriction until the cloud era, and now solutions are coming out like we have and that we utilize that can help us keep up, if not be faster than the business in a lot of cases.
And that, one of the things that comes out of our survey is that outcome of being on time is something that enterprises definitely want, right? So you're ready. Jamie, you had said earlier, you can respond to changes almost immediately. And so when something happens, there's no let's wait for the networking to show up. It's yep, we can do it. We can do it now, and it's not a disruptive process, as much as it used to be. Yeah.
Yes.
So, keeping on the theme of DevOps, the whole DevOps movement, the developers, application architects, and many times are becoming very influential in making infrastructure purchases, not just networking, but sort of across the entire application stack. Largely driven for some of the things we've talked about, the ease of ability to go out and acquire cloud services and to sort of self-manage them and self-drive them, in these very sort of simplified UIs, makes it very easy for developer teams, and they've become very comfortable with setting up those environments. And typically they'll do them, I think, in a development environment, and then when they move to prod, they move over to when they move to production, they move over to an IT department, or the IT folks take over if they're in a DevOps teams. And so some of the hurdles that we hear that DevOps teams face are things like the technical complexity of all of these different systems, which they necessarily aren't used to managing, being developers or application architects. It's one more thing for them to learn to understand, in addition to writing code and creating applications and components. There are concerns around governance and security, and of course concerns around costs. And then there are cultural changes like overcoming resistance to change. There's always going to be some team members that are going to be a little slower maybe to adapt, and you can usually bring them along. They're competing resources and priorities, and this is particularly true for networking. There's the whole idea of move fast and break things, but in networking, similarly in storage, you do want to move fast, but you do not want to break things. Nobody wants unplanned downtime. And so, I guess, Jamie, to sort of, what kinds of, I guess, sort of technology barriers, hurdles did you identify that you had to get over? And then sort of the same question on the cultural side as well.
Yeah, I think from a primary barrier for us was, looking at what we required. As far as our new phase of our scale and the connectivity and architectural requirements around it, and looking internally at our teams and understanding what skills we already had, what core competencies we had, and then solving that. So solving the potentially lack of skills or training associated with that. That's a big barrier. Technical complexity and skills and training, I think, go hand in hand, because as the complexity goes up, you obviously have to continue to upscale your employees. No real concerns about governance or security or compliance, because our application is very hyper focused on that. But I can tell you that we didn't have some of these bottom items, like existing processes is sufficient, organizational, cultural resistance, or legacy applications. We really didn't have any of that because we knew we needed a solution, and we didn't have one at the time. So we didn't have a lot of primary barriers. I can tell you that, and this is an interesting thing, but coming into a cloud-first environment, when I started at Tekion and driving this hybrid cloud on-premise connectivity charge, was definitely a little bit of a cultural shock to some of the engineers, right? Because when you have software engineers that are writing cloud applications, they don't necessarily understand the needs and why these things have to be a certain way, like hybrid networking or on-premise networking. So we definitely had some cultural challenge around, just education and understanding of why this stuff was so important and why it was needed. But ultimately, we knew about equity of benefits and costs. We had full top-down support. So ultimately, it was not an issue to move from a barrier standpoint, but we did have some bumps along the way that had to be solved.
And so you're pretty far along now. I mean, you've been doing this for quite a while, doing hybrid cloud for quite a while. Do you still find new challenges sort of crop up?
Yeah. Yes. I think, it really depends on, our customer environments vary so greatly, right? We have customers that are super tiny, single building people, and then we have large enterprise level customers. And when you think about that, their needs, not only from a customer standpoint on the software side, but also on the physical networking and connectivity side, are vastly different. So we continue to face challenges around how we interconnect with dealers, where we interconnect, whether we're doing it on the public space, private space, SD-WAN layers. I mean, we're all over the place as far as how we are actually interfacing with what we are with our customers. And so, Mike, that really is where the challenges come from, is, continuing to have a platform that's flexible to deal with anything that gets thrown at us. And so far, we've been able to meet every challenge, but I am sure there are some that will continue to challenge us as we move along. I mean, it was a never ending story because everyone is different.
So I'm curious. I mean, can you, I guess, the idea of reliability and flexibility, and you kind of have to meet your customers where they are. How, I guess, so from your perspective, I mean, how would you characterize, I guess, the reliability of, say, using an internet as a backbone versus, say, dedicated circuits? Because going to cloud services, you can use a VPN over the internet, or you can set up an MPLS circuit using a carrier. There are obviously reasons to do both, but I'm mostly just sort of interested in sort of what you think the reliability is, and sort of how do you architect for reliability and of the wide area.
Yeah, so we've had really, really good success over the internet. It's I don't think that MPLS is necessary at all anymore, especially with SD-WAN products and redundancy. Both in on the hardware side as well as like with multipath and multiple mediums. So we've had incredible success. I mean, our uptimes are amazing to the point that there's no reason for us to go to DX or direct connect connectivity or dedicated enterprise level connectivity. We work with some customers that have that, but I don't think I think it is definitely, given the way that we are moving towards, it is a dying connectivity platform, in my opinion.
Okay, great. And just a reminder, if you have any questions from the audience, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box, and we'll try and answer them live or potentially save them towards the end. So we asked our vote respondents what some of the most important business drivers were to cloud networking, and this is a select all, so there's not a whole lot of variation from the low to the high. But reducing the need for specialized networking skills, something that Jamie sort of had talked about, was pretty important. And in talking to enterprise IT, about this topic, what it sort of comes down to is they're taking on more and more cloud services, and each one is sort of a new and different skill set. And the IT directors and so forth that I was talking to, they aren't worried that their IT people can't learn these new services, but it's just the number of services that they're going to have to learn and to understand, becomes somewhat untenable over time. They want to reduce the capex associated with networking and with operations, which is again always a concern. And it's not only the money required to acquire new networking, but it's also the ability to scale up when demand changes. And then of course there's that decreasing time for creating new services, and these are things that I know, Jamie, you had mentioned before, already, but I'm wondering, can you talk to us a little bit about how the speed and flexibility of your network has become a differentiator?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at all of these items, our time to market is probably best in industry for what we do. Generally speaking, I think in our industry, a deployment across all teams can take 90 to 120 days minimum. We not just our facet of the business, but we can accommodate deployments in a matter of days instead of months. I think that really gives us a competitive advantage in the market. And then obviously the usability and openness of our network systems, like I talked about, right? We can accommodate everything from an enterprise level customer down to a single point customer with no change to the way that we do our business. And not only that, it's a very agnostic solution. So we don't have, like you're saying, the concern for IT directors to learn, for their employees to learn all these different systems. I just don't think that. I think that's becoming, somewhat of a thing of the past when you move to solutions that are cloud first for that kind of connectivity, right? You're no longer locking into Cisco or locking into Juniper or other specific languages network-wise, right? You're really being agnostic and opening up the flexibility for anyone to enter into an environment and inherit it and understand it.
Mm-hmm. So just as sort of a point of contrast, what kinds of requests prior to your move to hybrid WAN were you getting that were time consuming?
Well, I mean, to be honest, at first it was okay, right? Because we only had so many endpoints we had to manage. But as we scale our business, multiple X per month, every single one was a custom configuration. Whereas we have a single standardized config, with some parameters that are flexible, but, our deployment time for just the connectivity piece has gone from hours to literally minutes based on few specific parameters we receive from a customer. We're ready to, on our side of the equation is ready to go. And generally speaking, it takes longer for the customer to bring themselves onto the platform rather than us doing the work to be ready for them, which I think is a huge advantage.
Jamie, I'm stunned by this notion that your competitors are taking 3 months and you're able to deliver it in a couple of days. And then you've also added flexibility. Is it because they're taking are they taking a hardware-based approach to this problem? Are they trying to standardize, and that's where the flexibility for your customers become challenging?
Yeah, generally, I think our industry is very inflexible as far as even physical requirements, and I think by giving us flexibility across what we can support, and by us providing that to customers, it not only decreases the time to deploy, right? We don't need to wait for new stuff to come in or install all these things. But it also reduces switching costs tremendously, which just makes the whole process much easier.
Switching costs of what?
Moving platforms, or for customers to come onto our platform, right? Like there's very, very minimal cost from the hardware network requirement, that kind of side, to move to our platform. Obviously, there are features that require hardware on the platform and so on and so forth, but to just switch to the platform, switching costs are very low.
Okay, all right. And so that sort of brings up another question: is why aren't what moved Tekion to a hybrid cloud provider? I mean, all of the cloud services provide simplified networking capabilities. You don't have to be a router jockey to set up networking in any of the cloud services. So what was, I guess, were the tools good enough? Not enough? Were you looking for something different?
Yeah, I think first off, I think monitoring is pretty poor on the native. I mean, you could build it out, but we wanted like an all-in solution. I also think that some of the technologies used, by some of the cloud providers with their direct VPN connectivities, kind of can cripple a customer, especially if you don't have, in our case, our specific use case, we don't have visibility end to end in many cases. So we need to have a lot of that control on our side rather than on the customer equipment. So that's one thing. The other thing, the bigger piece of this is obviously giving our teams complete visibility over the platform so they can troubleshoot faster. But we wanted to future-proof our infrastructure to not have to make a major change just to switch to a multi-cloud or new cloud environment. We wanted flexibility to not have to make drastic changes just because our other teams wanted to do so.
Along those lines, it's not just necessarily even multiple clouds, but multiple regions. You want to give the example of your line of business coming back last week with a request?
Yeah, I mean, a business unit could come to our team and say, we want to spin up connectivity in any region in the world tomorrow or in 3 days. And we could do it in a matter of minutes. And that's just very literal. I mean, we could be ready to go the same day, if not within the hour.
Yeah, Mike, I'll chime in about the native tools. I think, as we think about how networking is evolving and networking is changing, there really are 3 silos that have emerged. There's one silo, which is how do I get from my on-prem infrastructure to a cloud? And that's the conversation that we were talking about with Jamie about his customers and creating this customer network. And you can see there's inherent challenges just in that, whether you own the infrastructure or you don't own the infrastructure. Once you get into the cloud, how do I do networking inside the cloud? How do I go from one workload to another? How do I make sure that whatever segments I had from a security standpoint on-prem extend to the cloud, whatever security and policies that I had on-prem extend into the cloud? That's the second challenge. And then eventually, as you decide to scale, then it becomes, how do I go from one cloud to another? So it's to the cloud, inside the cloud, and across clouds. And the way we think about that is we're referencing there's the emergence of a new type of network, which we call, cloud area networking. And that's the idea that from a customer standpoint, to Jamie's point about visibility, you want end-to-end visibility. You don't want to go to one tool for your on-prem to cloud, another tool for inside the cloud, and then stitching together multiple tools from each of the cloud providers to get to have an understanding of traffic from one cloud provider to another. You just want sort of an end-to-end view, a single way of managing it. And that, I think, is the challenge that most folks are struggling with, which is you have this existing infrastructure. How do I connect it? And how do I have the flexibility so that if tomorrow my line of business says, I know we just decided we would just spin up one particular cloud provider in US East, but now all of a sudden we need to light up infrastructure in Europe, in Asia. And then, by the way, we just did a deal with another cloud provider and we need to spin up infrastructure in those cloud providers. Having the flexibility to be able to do that and to accommodate those kinds of changes, I think, extend beyond what the traditional types of tools are able to provide.
Yeah, and some of our other vote survey data shows that most organizations have several monitoring tools that they use, and they usually use it at either different points of the infrastructure, or different points of the application stack. Some may be more sort of networking focused, some may be more application focused, some may be more end user focused. But there's this mix of tools that aren't necessarily integrated together and they don't provide necessarily a holistic view of the application, which makes things like troubleshooting more difficult, and even just monitoring, predictive analysis, forecasting, and so forth becomes a lot more. It's a lot more complicated than it needs to be. And so, Jamie, since we're talking about that, I'm just curious. I mean, can you talk about sort of how monitoring has been improved and sort of some of the benefits you've received from those improvements?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we have to partner with third-party teams, and it could be internal, it could be an external third party. I think that the improvement in monitoring has given us the ability to provide correct information to these teams in the event that we have an issue. To the point that, a lot of times it's resolving itself, which is great. But when there is an issue, the increased ability for us to monitor visibly what's going on and get that data immediately, especially to our support teams, gives us like our mean time to resolution skyrockets. It goes skyrockets is the wrong term. It goes way down in a skyrocketing fashion, to the point that we're anyways, it goes down so much because we're able to provide clear, concise information instead of getting on the phone with someone and trying to go through both sides of our configurations and figure out what's going on. Ultimately, I don't think we do that in a lot of cases. We're just providing what we're seeing and identifying whether the issue is internal or external almost immediately. Yeah. Which is a huge benefit for us.
Great. And Ahmed, I'm wondering if you could just sort of comment, what are some of the biggest benefits you see sort of across your customer set? What are you hearing back from them?
Yeah, it's really, it is about speed. I think what's interesting about Jamie's use case is they've turned the speed with which they can spin up networking infrastructure as a competitive advantage to the business relative to other competitors in the business. So I think the biggest challenge is you have these folks that have spun up workloads and they are very eager to get up and going. You have lines of business that are adopting a single cloud or multiple clouds. You have organizations where the notion of a fixed office, where you have a couple different offices to now everyone can work from home and you have an office of one. Like, how do you think about geographic expansion of your network? How do you think about these SaaS applications that are connecting in? Like, figuring out this new architecture and how to build resiliency in. So like, how do I make sure that everything on-prem connects? And how do I make sure that that is resilient? How do I do it quickly? Like, is colos the right way? Is data centers the right way? Do I use MPLS? Can I use just SD-WAN? These are all the kinds of pressing decisions that need to happen as it relates to being able to execute quickly. And, the challenge is each of the cloud providers have slightly different capabilities. And certainly have different ways of doing things. So just because you happen to be an expert, you have expertise on AWS in-house, it doesn't translate to, GCP. It doesn't translate to Oracle Cloud. It doesn't translate to Azure. So building that expertise, trying to figure out what this end-to-end architecture looks like, building in resiliency, making sure you have visibility end-to-end, not to mention ensuring that you've got your security and compliance needs end-to-end. Those are all incredibly complex problems to solve and typically results in a slowdown of being able to roll out infrastructure. And so for us, typically what we see is the speed with which the networking team is able to move as a result of this. It is the networking teams are able to move at the speed of business. The line of business comes back tomorrow and says, we want to be in Europe. As Jamie says, we can be up in Europe in a couple of minutes. If we want to spin up a new cloud provider, no problem, we can spin up a new cloud provider. If you want to be able to provide disaster recovery from one region to another, no problem. You want to make sure that you have end-to-end security policies, including inside the cloud and across cloud providers, no problem. So the speed and simplicity, I think, are probably the biggest benefits that we consistently hear from our customers.
Okay. There's, in addition to the complexity of all these different cloud environments, networking teams are also gaining a whole lot more responsibilities, and this sort of builds off of what you were just saying, Ahmed and Jamie, and so the number of functions that network IT is expected to take on is really starting to grow, right? Performance monitoring and management is sort of the big one. But also networking within cloud services and deploying network elements, whether they're physical or virtual. Software-defined networking, container networking is sort of coming on the scene now and becoming a lot more interesting. There's this growing set of responsibilities, and where this starts to impact cloud networking is again. You can get virtual instances of these products and deploy them into cloud services. You can get similar functionality from the cloud services themselves and deploy them, and every cloud service is sort of in lockstep with each other, offering these kinds of services. So I'm kind of curious, Jamie, we can start with you. Have you seen a growth in these responsibilities of the networking functions beyond just, say, wide area networking, routing, and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has opened the door for decentralization of network services in an organization, which I think is really powerful for scale and agility. Like I was talking about earlier, right? Like our team, we work together with others, but it also we own and manage like everything, almost everything on this list that relates to our function of the business. Obviously working with other teams who own other parts, but you end up with, agreed upon interconnectivity and interchanges between these teams, but you're allowed to decentralize networking and be faster about how you deploy and how you bring your services anywhere. I think that's the biggest thing is we have started to own almost all of these where we generally wouldn't, I think, in a traditional environment, and have even internally in our team decentralized it further, giving more people ownership over certain facets of the network as well. And have these new functions, this sort of expanding list of functions, are those part of your typical deployment? So when you're talking about being able to bring up a new network in minutes, anywhere in the world, are these included in that? Yeah, I mean, like we are constantly we deploy in cloud, on premise, and in between on premise and cloud with every single deployment, and certain deployments have intercloud networking requirements. Obviously, network security comes into play with every single one. So to answer your question, yes, almost every one of these comes into play with every deployment.
Excellent.
So I see there's one question about, how do you compete with best of breed solutions, either in the security space or in the overlay space? And why don't I take that one? So the first is we integrate with best-of-breed vendors. We integrate with SD-WAN providers. We integrate with security vendors, firewalls, to enable cloud firewalls. So that's, I think, a big portion of the cloud area networking story is to be able to integrate with whatever infrastructure you have and make it work across the cloud area network. That's the first thing. The second thing is what I think you will see is that there are solutions that focus on each of the three silos that make up a cloud area network. So there are solutions that really focus on helping you connect from on-prem to the cloud, but they don't do any networking inside the cloud. The cloud providers definitely help with networking inside the cloud, but then when it comes to networking across clouds, they're not so strong. So they are companies that that specialize in each segment of that. And there are also companies that are doing this end-to-end cloud area networking. I think, you know, to the question that was asked in the audience, how are we different? It's in 3 areas. We are built, our infrastructure is built entirely in the cloud, and that is a unique differentiator. We offer it as a service, so it's not, you know, you don't have to buy hardware. You can pay as you go, which is very consistent with infrastructure as a service. And I think the last thing and most important thing is the approach that we take, which is we're the only solution in the market that doesn't require agents to be installed inside VPCs and VNets. So those 3, I think, are the big differentiators for us. Great.
Thanks, Ahmed. And with that, we're going to wrap up. We're at time. Any questions that we didn't get to, we will respond to them offline. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Ahmed. And thank you, Jamie, very much for your insights. Yahia?
Great. Thanks, everyone. Well, that actually concludes our webinar for today. Thank you, Mike, Jamie, Ahmed. And as a reminder, the on-demand version of this event will be available shortly. On behalf of Alkira and 451 Research, thank you for attending and have a great day, everyone.